Okay, so it actually took a while for me to film that. So here's part 2. On paragraph 24, that was in our simplified text. It says, I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. So first of all, I want to point out that that's an analogy because they're comparing the white moderate to a dam that blocks social progress. I also want to point out that King has a really strong message about white moderates. In fact, it kind of reminds me of in the Bible when they talk about being lukewarm, that you're not hot or cold. So King considers the white moderate very dangerous because they are not actively working against the civil rights movement. They mostly are quiet. And so the problem is these white moderates somewhat paint themselves as allies, saying that they sympathize with their plea and that, they're not racist or whatnot. But then, they won't do anything to change the status quo. And part of what he talks about in this passage right here is he compares them to a boil, so like a huge pimple almost on the skin, saying that it's so gross. That's a gross analogy there. Well, hold on. He says, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. So he's saying the people that are protesting are not the ones creating this tension and this problem. All they're simply doing is bringing to the surface the hidden tension that's already there. So he's calling out these white moderates saying, really, we're just bringing to attention the fact that you have these prejudices and you have these biases and you have these beliefs that you're not even aware of. And so he compares them to a boil that if you just cover it up, it doesn't ever get better. You kind of have to open it up in all its ugliness. Such a gross analogy. And let it air out and bring it to light and have it be exposed. So the light and justice must be exposed in order to heal. So you have to bring that to the surface. Oh, okay. Let's get off that page. I'm tired of that analogy. This is super gross. All right. Going to point out again, he's talking about Socrates and Jesus. Those are both illusions. So, here's one of our vocab words, stagnation. Remember, if something is stagnant, it's not moving. And I want to be honest, a lot of times when people talk about stagnation, it's in reference to water. And think about if you have... All right, sorry, I got distracted. So basically stagnation, though, a lot of times you think about water and how if water is stagnant, then it starts to grow bacteria and it gets little flies on it and mosquitoes. But running water tends to be cleaner. It tends to, it breathes life, whereas stagnant water breathes death. And so stagnation is definitely not a good thing. It's not moving or changing. So, and then likewise, we have the word complacency. Complacency means you're happy with the way things are. Here it says satisfied acceptance, like, oh, yes. All right. So why is he concerned with the attitudes of white moderates? Because you can't, people that aren't moderates, they're actively against you and you can try to change their mind. But with the white moderates, they appear to be on your side, but it's like they're secretly working against you. And so it's much harder to combat somebody who doesn't realize that they have these terrible prejudices as part of their core set of beliefs. If they think that they're being understanding and they're being moderate, then it's really hard for somebody to argue against that. So, Okay, moving on. Here it says, I've tried to stand between those two forces, saying that we need emulate. Emulate means like to copy something or act like something. Neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalists. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. So here he's saying, you really had two different ends. The end that was complacent, they're happy with the way things are, so they're not going to do anything about it. And the black nationalist who is fighting violently against segregation and prejudice. And so he's saying neither is the best path to take, but rather the path of love and nonviolent protest is the way to combat this. It's a key part, an integral part of the struggle for equal rights. Okay, so here we have another word, yearning. Yearning is like this deep longing and desire for something. Like if you were in a hot desert, you would yearn for water. So again, we have some allusion here. We're talking about the zeitgeist. At that time, because right now I don't actually even remember, general intellectual, moral, and cultural spirit of an era. I think that would have been more of a commonplace thought because that comes from German, and World War II was just like a couple of decades before this. So, all right, it says in paragraph 31, Mark references to historic figures. Going to point out again, this is called allusion. He's alluding to something. So the historical figures, we're talking about Martin Luther, John Bunyan, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. I saw another one a second ago. I think it was a missionary. Paul. There it was, Paul. What qualities do these historic figures have in common? So the first one is that they're all generally positive figures in history. They're never the villains. And the second is that they are all extremist. And so in this case, it says, how is King attempting to redefine what the word extremist means? So an extremist is normally seen as something bad. But what King is trying to do here is paint an extremist as a good thing if it is an extremist for love. It says, was not Jesus an extremist for love? Amos was an extremist for justice. Paul was an extremist for the Christian gospel. So he's taking the word extremist, which normally has a negative connotation, and making it a positive thing. So he's also calling on the reader to consider that being an extremist is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a good thing depending on the kind of extremist you are. He also is comparing himself to them. Down here it says, we must never forget that all three were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. And so he's also kind of showing a contrast that now he's being punished for being an extremist, but he's trying to say that he's also in the right, just like Paul and Jesus were. It just depends on why you're being an extremist. So here we go. Languished. Ugh. He's saying people that have protested are languishing in filthy roach-infested jails, suffering the abuse and brutality of policemen. He's actually saying these people are the ones doing that. Remember, languishing is like wasting away, growing weak, living in these conditions that are not ideal. Okay, in paragraph 34, we're marking sentences where he mentions his affection for and loyalty to the church. So, in paragraph 34, he mentions he's disappointed with the church. And he's not, it says, I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. He says it as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who has been nurtured in its bosom, who's been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true as to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. So his affection, he's saying, I grew up in the church. I was nurtured by the church. It sustains me. Its blessings sustain me. Okay. So when he's saying he's disappointed in the church, it's similar to when a parent has to express disappointment in their child. A parent loves their child. And when they're doing something wrong, a parent has to point out those things. So King is saying he's disappointed, but he's not saying it just to be critical of the church. He's saying it because he loves the church and he expects better of the church than what it's doing right now. He's presenting these credentials and emotions emphatically in order to show his sincerity of that disappointment. And I think he wants his readers to understand this criticism is coming from a place of love. So, paragraph 36 is another one from our simplified text that says, in spite of my shattered dreams, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern would serve as the channel through which our just grievances could reach the power structure I had hoped that each of you would understand. But again, I've been disappointed. So putting that right next to the paragraph about the church, he's saying, I really was expecting more. I was expecting you guys to understand our grievances. Grievances are kind of like complaints, and that you could take them to the power structure, like the government and the people in charge, because even though they're white, they're still supposed to be brothers and sisters in Christ. And so he's kind of saying, I expected you to have my back, church. I expected you to be a voice for us, but the church has still disappointed him. And so he's saying the church is not standing up for what's right in this case. So, okay, next page. Okay, we're making it through, guys. Right. In paragraph 42, Mark King's use of a question. He says, is organized religion too inextricably bound to the status quo to save our nation and the world? So first of all, inextricably bound. If it's inextricable, it means you can't separate them two. So he's saying, is the church so tied to the status quo, to the way things are right now, to save the nation? So can the church pull away from the ways of the world? Or are they too stuck to the way things are in order to save the nation and what's going on? Okay. Why does he begin this with this question? Because he wants the reader to think about this. He is calling on the church in these last few paragraphs to do something about these injustices. He's saying what they've done so far is disappointing because they haven't done anything. Okay. But the church is supposed to be a place of love and support, and it's not. So it's saying, kind of, church, you're going to have to make a choice. Are you going to follow the teachings of the Bible, or are you going to go with the ways of the world? And so the rest of the paragraph, he's pointing out individuals who have left their secure congregations. So they've left their church and walked the streets of Albany, Georgia, with the protesters, with us. They've gone down the highways of the South on those torturous rides for freedom. They've gone to jail. And so he's citing some people who have broken away from the ways of the world and doing what's right and what the Bible says is right. And so some of them have been dismissed from their churches. So some were fired. Some lost the support of their bishops and other ministers. But They acted in a faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. So even though they had bad consequences, they did the right thing for the right reason. And it's okay. It's okay that bad things happen if your heart is in the right place. And so the question is, organized religion too inextricably bound to the status quo to save our nation? The answer is no. People just have to find the courage, or the church rather, just has to find the courage to stand up for what is right. And he's saying their witness, so what these people have done, has been the spiritual salt that has preserved the true meaning of the gospel in these troubled times. They have carved a tunnel of hope through the dark mountain of disappointment. So the answer is they can break away, and they're a testament to that. I'm going to point out again, I'm going to do this on the Ed puzzle. We have a tunnel of hope through the dark mountain of disappointment. Anyway, that's another analogy. They're comparing their actions to a tunnel and this disappointment to a huge mountain. So, this is good. So in the letter from the white clergymen, they're basically commending the way the police acted, saying they were so... It says, you warmly commended the Birmingham police force for keeping order and preventing violence. Mind you, the police force was spraying people with a water hose and setting vicious dogs on them. Okay? So obviously, the truth would be that they were not so passive. They were not so peaceful in how they kept order. And so he's saying, I doubt that you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I doubt you would so quickly commend the policemen if you were to observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes here in the city jail. If you were to watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls. If you were to see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys. If you were to observe them, as they did on 2 occasions, refuse to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together. I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. Okay. This is a good passage. So, number one, he's basically calling him out for telling lies. Okay. I do want to point out, we have the repetition of, I doubt that you would have. Okay. And then he continues to say, if you were to whatever, if you were to observe, if you were to watch, if you were to see. By the way, all of those are synonyms. So that's another example of parallelism as well. He's using the same grammatical structure to create rhythm in his speech, or it's not really a speech, in his letter, and tie those ideas together. So he's saying, I wish you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. Again, we have parallelism. They're this, and they're this. So not only is he saying that the clergyman commended the wrong group of people, he's saying these are really the people that you need to commend. It's these people that are willing to risk everything for nonviolent protest, because they're the ones taking a risk and suffering the consequences. I feel like we're almost done, guys. All right. So this last question says, Mark King's descriptions of himself in paragraph 47. So here he's saying he's never written such a long letter. He's afraid it's much too long to take your precious time. So he's worrying that people aren't going to read it because it's so long. And he's saying, it would have been a shorter letter if I had been writing this from a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when he's alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? Parallelism again. Okay. So his description is basically saying, you guys are free. You have comforts. You have everything you need. But I'm the one sitting here in jail, and I have nothing else to do with my time but to respond to this. He realizes that the reader's time is important, but he is locked up and wishing that he could go out and be a part of the fight. But unfortunately, he's in jail right now. So he says, let us all hope that the deep clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. Again, parallelism and analogy, comparing prejudice to dark clouds and misunderstanding to a deep fog. Okay. Anyway, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. So he's showing love and brotherhood are going to be radiant stars, and you can see stars through dark clouds and deep fog. So he's saying it's going to shine bright. So that's another example of antithesis, contrasting the fog and the clouds and then the radiant stars. So, okay.